Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you once again.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Things, once again, are things okay over there?
They are managing well,
Yeah.
I believe.
Thanksgiving next week, right? Is next week? Yeah, Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's we'll be here
Creep,
very, very soon.
creeping up on us.
Yes.
Um, Holidays. For some, it's a time of loneliness,
Yeah.
but what brought this up, this idea of loneliness? We're going to talk about loneliness today, right?
Yes, we are.
The epidemic of loneliness. And I was talking to a father that he happened to call, and we were chatting, and he said, he was sort of waxing philosophical. He said, we assumed that the internet would bring us closer together, that it would break down barriers, and that was the promise of the internet. And then he said, instead, it seems the opposite has happened. And he said, and it sure has happened in my family, that the internet, cell phones, and people being on electronics has really served more to separate us than to bring us together in his family. And it got me thinking about, the isolationism that's created with electronics. And it got me thinking about a podcast that we did a couple of months ago where we report, the U.S. Surgeon General had reporting on a study by the American Psychological Association was that loneliness, one of the things he reported is loneliness is reaching epidemic proportion.
Right.
Um, and he felt that loneliness was part of this larger issue that rates of mental illness are increasing among children and especially teenagers. Um, and so we thought, well, let's take another look at this relationship between social media and loneliness. It's always being updated.
Hmm.
And one of the things I hadn't thought about this before, I'm embarrassed to say, because I'm sure my more intelligent colleagues and friends have already thought about it. There's something called the loneliness curve.
Yeah.
And that if you think of an inverted U, you take a U and turn it upside down, so it's like a mountain. People tend to be lonelier in adolescence and later in life.
Hmm.
In midlife, when so you get early adolescence, and you get to midlife, and then you get old age. Okay, early adolescence, old age. In midlife, you're engaged. You're working. You're probably working.
Right.
You have children who are in school, so
Hmm.
you're interacting with your work colleagues and your hobby colleagues and your children and your children's parents and your children's school and your children's coaches. So there's all this interaction that you have in midlife. Then you have early adolescence, then you have midlife, and then you have the elderly, old age, the empty nest and beyond. And we all know about the effects of the empty nest. As your children leave, and I think every parent has discovered this, as your children leave, you can feel your social life diminish, okay, because you're not involved with all those people. You're not meeting the parents of your kids. Our kids are now gone off and they have their own relationships. So there's a dramatic, rapid increase in loneliness at the end. The problem that the Surgeon General brought up is that teenagers are reporting levels of loneliness that are comparable to the elderly, and that was new. That was an unexpected and a new finding. And so we found this article by Brian Chen, who knows about this. He's the author of Tech Fix, and it's a column about he specializes in the social implications of technology use and the relationship between high tech and this loneliness.
Absolutely. And, I know that there were other studies that came out and other people who have written about some of these issues because I remember back in I think it was during the pandemic even, we talked about how, social media may be the way to save us all during the
Mhm.
pandemic because, we're, being quarantined and secluded and excluded from everyone else and we're social distancing and all that jazz. Um, but we have social media and it can keep us connected. And if we remember around that time, and especially just as the pandemic was, things were opening back up and everything, there were lots of reports that came out that people who used social media the most actually reported higher levels of loneliness.
Hmm.
That, while we sort of have this idea that social media means that we're being social, um, people tended to feel more lonely
Hmm.
the more that they used social media. And this phenomenon is really interesting because it is counterintuitive in some ways to think,
Right.
oh, you're staying connected with people, but yet you feel more lonely.
Right. Right. Yeah. So we know there's a correlation, right?
Right.
And we've talked about correlations many times on the program. And we have to be careful, but we know there's some correlation
Right.
between how much you're using, or maybe it's the way you're using it, and your feelings of loneliness.
Right. Because a correlation just means there's a relationship. It doesn't mean
Right.
that one causes the other or one makes the other worse or better or anything like that. It's just that there's a relationship between the two.
Yeah, it may be that lonely people tend to use social media more than
Mhm.
social people, highly social people.
Right.
It could be just the reverse. Okay. And that's what we want to investigate. We don't need to begin with assumptions, but we need to investigate is why is there this relationship? There's little proof when it comes to the science of all this that technology directly makes people lonely. So, and I like the way he phrases that because there are plenty of you're very social and you
Mhm.
spend a lot of time on media. So I think you do, wouldn't you agree? You do both. Okay.
Yeah.
You're,
Yeah.
you're highly social. You go out a lot. You have lots of friends. You're very active in the real world with children and your spouse and other colleagues. But yet you spend a lot of time. I think you're a user. You
Mhm.
use technology a lot.
Yeah.
So we know that there isn't that direct correlation. And it may be, and this is what I think that we need to think about, is maybe they're using people who are lonely are using technology in unhealthy ways.
Right.
Maybe it's the way they're using it and not the technology itself. Um, or, again, we have to remember that maybe lonely people spend more time on binge watching. They don't have anything else to do. They're not going out, so they start watching some 27 episodes or something.
Right. And we've talked before about the difference between consuming and interacting.
Right. Right.
There are many people who simply consume social media and information on social media. They're scrolling and they're looking and they're absorbing what other people are doing in their lives. And then there's others who look at that stuff, but then that leads to conversations with other people. When when I find videos on TikTok, I will send those videos to you, and then you and I will talk about them later. And
Right.
and so social media and some of those sources of information can lead to more social interactions, but perhaps people who, like you said, people who are lonely, they're not using it that way. They're consuming the information, but it doesn't lead to that next step.
Right. Yeah, that's really a good point, is that you can use it to enhance your interactions,
Mhm.
or you can lose yourself in it and
Right.
prevent interactions. Okay. So so Brian Chen saying there's a couple of reasons why there might be a correlation between loneliness and technology. One is social media comparisons. And we talked about this recently when
Right.
we talked about perfectionism. We compare ourselves to others on social media. You were talking about the perfect photograph. You see one photo, but it's the one that was selected out of 25 that were taken to
Right.
get just the right, perfect everything.
Right.
Um, and so when you're comparing yourselves to social media, that's really an unfair comparison. That would be like me opening up a gentleman's magazine like Esquire or Gentleman's Quarterly or one of those magazines where they have these absolutely gorgeous male models. And, these guys are perfect specimens of our species. And if I'm looking at that and saying, oh, this is what I should look like, I'm gonna fail by comparison. Okay.
Right.
If I open up men's health and there's all these guys working out, I don't have that kind of body. I'm not sure that I ever will, that I will have the time or the whatever it takes to have that kind of body. But if I'm making those comparisons, I'm always going to fall short. Okay.
Absolutely.
So if you spend a lot of time on social media, you're going to find that you're falling short of everybody's expectations.
Right. Another reason why there may be a correlation is that, most of our interactions with other people in social media is through texting.
Right. That's right.
It could be direct messaging or texting or, lots of different ways that people do it and lots of different phrases that we have for it. But in essence, it's just texting. And texting is a very different method of communication than just about anything else. I mean, we use words in texting. We use acronyms. We
Emojis.
use text speech in texting that we don't use anywhere else. But it leaves so much out. There are so many important nonverbal messages that we get when we're talking to someone face to face, even through video chat like we're doing now.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's so much more that comes out when we're
Right.
communicating this way than comes out on via text. I mean, we've all had that experience where we text somebody something and they took it in a completely different way than we intended it to be taken.
Hmm.
And then we spend the next, we're fortunate enough that they said something about it.
Right.
Spend the next, however long trying to correct the error and say, oh, no, 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 that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. So much is missed in text messaging, again, that can lead to this problematic loneliness.
Right. I watch my children on their phones and I watch them text their friends. And I'm thinking, texting is great for things like, I'll meet you there at 10:30.
Mhm.
That quick text, that's very factual. What I worry about is when I see when people are trying to negotiate a romantic relationship
Mm.
with a text. Okay, they're texting these long paragraph texts. Um, and they're trying to negotiate a fight that they had earlier in the morning. Texting is not a good way to resolve those
Right,
kind of differences. It's great to say for logistical support.
right.
I'll see you there at 10. I can't make it today. I'll see you tomorrow. Perfect for that. But be careful how you use it. So texting can become a problem that could lead to loneliness.
Mm.
And the third is binge watching.
Yeah.
Do you binge watch?
Uh,
I don't think
I
you
find
do. Do
myself,
you?
sometimes, when you just get stuck on something. Oftentimes it's with a program or something like that, and it's just they do a good job of getting you hooked so that you want to stay engaged with it. Uh,
Right.
but I think the challenge is with things like one of the big complaints about TikTok or Instagram and things like that is the doom scrolling. You're just kind of going through, and that kind of binge watching I think is more problematic because
Hmm.
if you go on even YouTube, the videos will just keep going, and so it just suddenly instead of watching a 2-minute video, 3 hours have gone by and you've watched 50 videos about different things and completely you've completely lost contact with the rest of the world during that time. And
Yeah.
that's problematic.
Now, I like when I hear couples say, we watched
Right.
Downton Abbey. We watched, if you're binge watching with a partner, I
Hmm.
think that's probably okay. If you're binge watching alone, if you're if you're staying at home alone for days or weeks at a time, then it could be a problem.
Well, again,
People,
I think it goes back to you're consuming it, but you're also using it as a mechanism for interacting and communicating with other
right.
people. If I came in and said, "Hey, we watched, you use Downton Abbey as an example. That's an interesting example. But hey, we watched, season 2 of Downton Abbey this weekend, and it engaged in a conversation about it.
Mhm.
That's very different than yeah, watching it by yourself and then not talking to anybody because you don't want anybody to know that you watched Downton Abbey for some reason.
Hmm. Right, right. Um, So how do you manage? So what we're saying is it's probably not technology itself, it's how we're using it,
Right.
okay? And what it can be used for. If I'm watching, I have some friends who watch different programs on TV, and if we're watching the same stuff, when we get together, there can be a lively discussion of a shared program that we're watching, okay? But if I'm not meeting people in person, then I'm starting to isolate, and then I'm just consuming and I'm not sharing. So how do you manage all this stuff?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about social comparisons.
And social comparison is something we've always done. That's, you know,
We all do it.
Bandura talked about social learning theory, right? It's we look at what other people do and we learn from that. And so we've always done some kinds of different kinds of social comparisons, whether it's in athletics or school or anything
Right.
else. We see what others are doing and we try to imitate that. The difficulty is we when we compare ourselves to others as this sort of ideal, and we're constantly consumed with this ideal that there's just, you use the example of magazines and stuff, that we're just not going to attain, um because we can't, or because we don't have that kind of genetics, or we don't have that kind of
Mhm. Right.
whatever, you know, then again we're stuck in this perspective of that's what we're supposed to be, but there's no way I can be that. And so that dissonance is too hard to overcome.
Right. I can't be that. And so you start to slink back. Okay. But the other thing about social media is that there are many, before you did a visual comparison, you
Right.
looked at other people and then you looked at yourself and said, okay, this is how I compare to that person. That's how we did comparisons.
Mhm.
I don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't look like The
Right.
Rock. Okay. But now, in addition to that, with social media, we have other ways of comparing and gauging and judging our place in the world. Things like likes. How many likes did you get? What comments did you get? How many reshares did you get? How many emojis and what are they? How long does it take before somebody responds to your text? These are measurements of this is how we validate ourselves today.
Right. Well, and I think that the other piece to it is that, you know, when we used to compare ourselves to others visually or physically, it was like, you could see if you were playing baseball, and I'm sure that this happened to you when you were playing sports or baseball or soccer or whatever sport. You see someone else do something and you're like, wow, that was cool. And then you can try to do it. But what you also see is that same person mess up. You see
Right.
that same person not do well. You see them lose the ball, or you see them strike out, or you see them, throw a wild pitch or something.
Mhm.
Social media offers this, again, this image of perfection. It's like, you only see the best piece of it.
Right.
Um, and because of that, you don't get that balance of, yes, they do that really, really cool move, but they also
Mhm.
mess up over here. And so when you only are consuming it through social media, you're only stuck there with the perfect example, and you don't have that balance.
Yeah, you hit a home run, but you made a fatal. But then you made an error when you were playing shortstop.
Right,
So you are human. We all have a little success. We all have a few failures, right? But you don't see that. We get this sanitized version,
right.
and you can't possibly keep up with the likes and the. Remember, there was a time when kids would buy likes. You could actually purchase likes to make yourself look better. What Brian Chen says in his article, what he reminds us of is that the apps that we're using are they're specifically designed to encourage people to compete with each other for these things.
Right.
Okay. There's this constant competition and to seek validation. But you're seeking validation against this backdrop of perfect specimens. And therein lies the damage. It's what you're comparing yourself to. You're comparing yourself to this idealized version that nobody ever achieves.
Right. Absolutely.
And then the texting, you've already mentioned that. How do you deal with texting? Um, what we have to do is use texting for what it's good for. If you're going to text somebody HBD, which stands for happy birthday in text in the text world, you can save that. Don't bother. If all you can do is send me HBD, keep it, save the energy for somebody else. That's not an effective way to express sympathy, congratulations, or anything else. If you really mean it, then figure out a way to personalize it. Don't. There are certain things that you shouldn't text. You shouldn't try to resolve arguments with texting because that's going to lead to trouble. And congratulations and sympathy should be expressed in a more personal way.
Absolutely. And we did talk about some ways to manage concerns related to like binge watching and stuff like
Right.
that, where,
Mhm.
you can talk to other people about it. One of the things I like to do is, there's shows that I sometimes will watch several episodes, one right after the other, is, do it while you if you have it, if you're on a treadmill or something like that, watch it while you're jogging or going for a walk,
Right.
because you're exercising, you're doing something productive at the same time. Uh,
Right.
that part, of course, isn't necessarily social, but
Mhm.
you're at least doing something else, achieving another goal. But I really like the idea of if you're going to binge watch a program or something, make sure have your friends, if your friends are watching it also, or your partner's watching it also, so that you can talk about it and you can interact with others about it.
Right. And that's, I think, what he meant earlier when he said maybe we're using technology in unhealthy ways. It's not the technology itself, it's the way we're using it. The way we make social comparisons, that's unhealthy. The
Right.
way we text can be unhealthy. It can be very helpful, but it can be unhealthy. And the way we binge watch. One of the things that, it would be wonderful. I think you said it, people in their cars will listen. You're driving, so that's a waste of time driving. And so you listen to podcasts. Okay.
Mhm.
So you use that time to do other things. People who live in cities always have a book with them because when they're on the subway or on the tram, they're reading while they're being transported around the city. So take your stuff with you and go out and go for a walk and do your binge watching or your listening or whatever you're doing. Because what you're doing with binge watching is it can be very solitary and produce loneliness because it's something you're doing by yourself. So get out and do something with it.
Right.
Um, you know, I can't imagine. I was talking to some people the other day who lived in New York during the pandemic,
Mhm.
and they said it was horrible because New York really shut down. The bigger cities, Washington, New York, and I think Chicago, some of those cities really shut down, and you had to stay indoors. I remember when it went through Italy
Yeah.
and people were dying, and it was one of the early hotspots was northern Italy,
Yeah.
and people would stay in their houses, and at night they would clang spoons onto pans just to make noise, just to
Yeah.
say we're here, we're all still here, and some way to communicate with each other. But I had forgotten that when our cities shut down and people weren't allowed out, they weren't allowed to leave their buildings. These people who lived in New York said it was really terrible to
Mhm.
be locked in your apartment,
Right.
in these little apartments, because most of them are small, to be locked in their apartments, and many of them had to leave the city. They
Mhm.
had to try to get out of the city because they were going. My sister struggled with that in DC. She has a condo in DC, and they were not allowed outside. They were not allowed to go out and do anything. And
Yeah.
she said it was very, very difficult. So the pandemic shows us that we are really social.
Yeah.
I was in the hospital during the early part of the pandemic, and man, you weren't even allowed to open your door
Right.
when you were in a hospital. You couldn't stick your head, you couldn't do anything.
Right.
And so we learned during the pandemic that we're social. So whatever we do, we have to remember that we really are social creatures, and isolation is a problem.
Yeah.
And beware of how you're making social comparisons, texting and binging. These things can be helpful or they can be harmful. It
Right.
depends how you use them.
Absolutely. Loneliness is whether it causes mental health challenges or whether we know that there's a relationship. We wouldn't say that it's causal necessarily, but that relationship is so important. And I know we work with a lot of patients who are dealing with issues related to loneliness. So we'll put a link in the show notes to the articles so that you can read some more about it, and maybe even check out the book that they're talking about. So, but I think that's it for today. We'll be back next week with some other topics to talk about. So it is the holiday season after all. So yeah,
We're
everybody,
not gonna we're not gonna do that, are we?
who knows what we're gonna do? I don't know.
There is one before we leave. If anybody would like, there's a lot of talk about the election, post-election blues or something.
Yeah.
People are really struggling with the results of the election. If anybody has, I don't know, we hadn't planned on talking about that, but
Right.
if anybody has questions about it, we'd be happy to give you our 2 cents on the topic about dealing with your whatever feelings you're having about getting through this time. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. Well, that's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.